Hi friend, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about what insulin resistance is and why insulin resistance can block weight loss for women. And I'll give a few solutions at the end as to what you can do to not only reduce insulin resistance, but to help you lose weight. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so first question is, what is insulin resistance? And there are multiple parts to it, but insulin resistance is a two-part problem. The first problem with insulin resistance is that you have high insulin in the blood, okay? That's the first problem. The second problem with insulin resistance is that insulin receptors are not working properly. So let's take another step back. First, you have to understand what insulin is. And insulin is a protein that is produced, or a hormone that is produced by the pancreas. And insulin's job is to remove glucose from the bloodstream because the body has a set amount of glucose that it can tolerate in the bloodstream. Too low, the body is under stress. Too high, the body is under stress. So every time you eat something that contains carbohydrates or even protein, then that is going to go through your GI system, and then your GI system is going to release glucose into the bloodstream. And when the glucose is released into the bloodstream, there's an alarm that senses that glucose is there. Insulin is produced by the pancreas. Insulin comes, it binds onto glucose, and then it has to take that glucose somewhere safe, okay, somewhere that it can be used. A lot of times it's going to take the glucose into your liver, or it can take it into your fat cell if there's too much glucose in the body, or if you have more glucose in the body than your body needs for that day, or it can take it into your muscle. These are the three places where your body will store excess glucose, okay? So that is what insulin is. And then the insulin receptor is kind of like a gate. So think of insulin as a key, and then the receptor is like the lock. And so the key comes, it goes into the lock. It says, hey, I have glucose that I need to get rid of. Well, not get rid of, but I need to take away from the bloodstream and store it somewhere. And so it will say, okay, you can come in. And so the key goes into the lock, it opens, and the gates open, and this allows glucose to get transported into a cell. It could be a liver cell, it could be a fat cell, it could be a muscle cell. As a matter of fact, I believe that every cell in the body has an insulin receptor. The only thing that doesn't have that is going to be the brain. So the brain does not store any glucose, which is why it needs glucose constantly for your body to function. But every other organ in the body is going to have have the capability to store a little bit of glucose, because glucose is important for ATP production in the body, okay? So that's what insulin resistance is, okay? Oh, actually, that's what insulin is. Now, what is insulin resistance? Insulin resistance occurs when either the insulin is too high in the body, and that is usually because of high amounts of carbohydrate, maybe protein intake, or high amounts of food that comes into the body, and that requires high insulin to come. How do I explain this? Okay, so what is insulin resistance? So insulin resistance is a two-part problem. First, you have insulin that is high. Why is insulin high? Insulin is high because there's too much glucose coming into the body, or glucose being released into the body. So let's say you eat something that has, let's say you eat a croissant, right? A croissant typically is very carbohydrate, but it doesn't have a lot of other parts to it. So it doesn't have a lot of protein, it doesn't have a lot of fiber. So when you eat a carbohydrate, it's going to be metabolized or broken down very quickly by the GI system. And so the release of glucose into the blood happens really fast, and there's a lot of glucose going in. And when that happens, the change in the amount of glucose in the blood creates like an alarm, and that insulin has to go out and come and get rid of this glucose, right? Now, if you're constantly eating Let's say you eat a croissant at 8, and then you eat something at 11, and then you eat something at 2, then you eat something at 5, and then you eat something at 8, and then you eat something at 11. So like, let's say you have 6 or 7 snacks throughout the day, then the pancreas is constantly producing insulin to deal with all the glucose that's coming in. And so what can end up happening is that your insulin is not able to come down fully, right? So glucose goes up, insulin goes up, and you need to have enough time for the glucose to go down and for the insulin to go down. But if you start to eat before your insulin goes down, then the insulin stays high and more insulin is produced, and then the process continues. So insulin resistance usually is not going to happen over a period of days. This is a cumulative effect that happens months and years. I would say years, okay? Years of high insulin in the blood will lead to hyperinsulinemia. And so that is one of the problems that we deal with, or that we see with insulin resistance. The second problem is the fact that some of your insulin receptors are not working properly. So like I said, the insulin receptor is the lock, right? It's the thing that decides whether or not it will open up to take glucose in, or whether or not it will open up for glucose to be used. All right. So let's say, for example, we're trying to lose weight. Okay, so let's talk about the second problem, why insulin resistance blocks women from losing weight or from losing fat. So let's say that you are insulin resistant. Let's say you went to your doctor, you found out you were pre-diabetic, your insulin is, let's say 25, your fasting insulin is 25, hemoglobin A1C might be 5.7, and your doctor tells you you need to lose weight. So what happens? So first thing that most people do is that they do calorie restriction. So they try to lower their calories. And this is okay if you have what we call metabolic flexibility. So here, metabolic flexibility basically means that your body has the ability to switch between using glucose as a form of energy versus using fat, okay? So the assumption that you're making is that if you lower the amount of glucose coming in, then your body is going to open up its fat stores and release fat to be broken down into a food source, okay? But that's not always going to happen if you're insulin resistant and the insulin receptor to your fat cell is not working, okay? So what can happen for some people is that you decide to lose weight, right? You decide to cut your carbs down, and so you bring your glucose levels down in the hopes that the amount of calories that you cut will come from your fat cells, right? So you're hoping that, let's say you normally eat 2,000 calories and you decide, I'm going to start eating 1,500 calories daily, and I know that the other 500 is going to come from my fat cell. So I'm going to be able to lose weight, because when the fat cell shrinks, then you lose weight. So that's the assumption. So you start eating 1,500 calories, and then maybe your body requires 2,000. So now it's saying, I need 500 calories. 500 calories is missing. Where am I going to get it from? Well, if your insulin receptor on your fat cell is not working properly, it's not going to open up to allow the body to take fat from it to be used as fuel. Okay, and one of the things that blocks this insulin receptor from working properly is cortisol. It's stress. Okay, cortisol is notorious for blocking the insulin receptor from working properly. So now your body is going to freak out because it's missing 500 calories that it needs for it to function. And what is it going to do? It's going to make you feel tired. It's going to make you feel hungry. Like you're going to start to have hypoglycemic episodes, right? Or feel like you have hypoglycemia. People always say on the internet, how come fat people are hungry, right? How come you have all this fat in your body and your body is not able to tap into it? Well, if that receptor is not working properly, it doesn't matter how much you cut your calories, and a lot of people do that. They keep cutting the calories lower and lower and lower. If that receptor is not working properly, no fat is going to be released, okay? And this is something that people don't understand, but this is why I'm talking about it today. So you have to tackle, and my approach for tackling weight loss is actually making sure that we fix the insulin receptor first before we ever work on bringing your insulin levels down. Okay, so what I recommend women do, right? Okay, before I even get to what I recommend, the way I want you to think of insulin resistance, right, is that it's a two-part problem. Hyperinsulinemia, which basically means you're eating food that contains a lot of carbohydrates, right? Usually it's going to be processed carbohydrates. So problem one is processed carbohydrates that you've been having for a long period of time. Problem two is going to be stress and cortisol and inflammation. Those are all tied in together. So cortisol, high levels of cortisol or high amounts of inflammation in the body will directly block the insulin receptor from working properly. And let me explain why that happens. If your stress levels are high, right, your body's alarm system wakes up and it's like, I need to protect the body, which means everything is closed for business. Okay, your stomach is closed, right? So you tend to have constipation, and when that happens, you're not absorbing nutrients properly. Your fat cells are going to be locked in, and even your muscle cells are going to be locked. Like, your body is not trying to fix anything, it's not trying to grow anything, it's trying to survive. And any food that comes into the body when you're stressed will be channeled towards protecting your organs, and that's what we call visceral fat. So your body's going to take that food that you're taking in when you're chronically stressed, it's going to put it towards your stomach. It's going to protect your organs, all right? And while it's protecting your organs, it's not going to allow you to lose fat from your subcutaneous fat, right? It's going to keep accumulating fat in your visceral space. So a lot of times when you're struggling to lose weight, it's because there's a lot of visceral fat. There's a lot of stress in the body. And when there's stress in the body, the food that you take in, instead of being the excess food that you take in, instead of being funneled towards your fat cells or your muscle cells, it gets funneled towards your visceral fat cells. And that's the fat that grows. That fat causes more inflammation, and it's like a cascade, and it continues to make you hungry for easily digestible foods, which is usually going to be processed foods. And it's like a vicious cycle. So you keep craving the same things, you keep getting hungrier and hungrier, and your stomach keeps getting bigger. And guess what? It doesn't just block the receptor of the fat cell, it also blocks the receptor of the muscle cell, which can also store a lot of the excess nutrients that you're taking in, right? So the classic example of somebody who is dealing with this, they have a lot of belly fat. They have a lot of fat in the upper body, like upper back. And then if you look at the legs are like small, right? And you almost feel like the muscles are not working. So they have like muscle wasting. Like if you look at their butt, like their butt is like non-existent. That's because your muscles' insulin receptor is not working. And so when the insulin receptors are working on the muscle cell, your muscle cannot grow and it cannot take in the excess calories that you're eating, right? So this is really, really bad for the body. And so when I'm talking to women about weight loss, I'm telling them that the way to lose weight successfully, if you have insulin resistance, is you have to first tackle problem number one, which is the cortisol and the inflammation. If you can tackle those two things, then you have the ability for your receptors to work properly. And then once the receptors work properly, now you can bring insulin down. Once you bring insulin down, now you have the ability to flip between using glucose as a way of using glucose as a I'm blanking out. Now you have the ability to use glucose as a form of energy, and you can use fat as a form of energy. Now you can flip between glucose and fat. So basically now you can become metabolically flexible. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do if you want to lose weight and you deal with insulin resistance, step one in my program is going to be stabilizing hunger. Okay, Very, very important. Stabilizing hunger and stabilizing your blood sugar. Because if we don't stabilize hunger, you're going to keep gaining weight, okay? And a lot of times when your hunger is off, the foods that you tend to eat are going to be foods that are easy to digest because your body, again, is under a lot of stress and it wants to keep storing food because it thinks that you're going to die in a couple of days, right? It's very, very irrational, but it's doing its job. It's trying to protect you. It's just that it's being given the wrong cues, okay? So you first have to stabilize your hunger and your blood sugar so that you don't gain weight. That's the first step. It's not really going to lose weight. You have to stabilize your hunger. So that means when you stabilize your hunger, you're eating like 3 meals a day, and they're going to be nutritious meals, right? Protein, fats, carbs, healthy carbs, whole foods, and you're eating 3 meals a day. Once you do that consistently, that's going to decrease the hunger that you're dealing with, okay? And then the next thing that we have to do is that we need to work on healing the gut, because the gut is going to be the place where you get the most inflammation in the body. The gut has the most inflammatory cells in the body. So if you heal the gut, you're going to reduce inflammation significantly in the body. Now, once you've done that, then you can go into this third step, which is going to be accessing and releasing fat cells, okay, or fat basically from the cells. So you need to be able to release fat, but that's not going to happen unless you heal the gut and you stabilize your hunger. And then the last step is going to be protecting your body, and that's where you're going to focus on building muscle, because muscle helps you be more insulin sensitive. It's going to help with your brain. It's going to help you maintain the weight loss so that you don't end up in a situation where you have to keep constantly gaining weight, losing weight, gaining weight, losing weight. That's just not healthy. And you want to make sure you have enough fat muscle on your body, because as you get older, you become more insulin resistant naturally. So the more muscle on your body, the more insulin sensitive you will become. So I want you to think of insulin resistance as a food problem and a stress problem, right? If you only deal with the food and you don't deal with the stress, you will lose weight and gain it back. And you will gain more, because the stress will then freak out because now you've brought food down, and the stress is like, well, now there's no food and I'm already stressed out, and it's going to become higher and it's going to make you eat more food. You're going to start binge eating, okay? So the first part of the program that I have is focusing on reducing inflammation, and it's focused on reducing hunger and reducing stress in the body. Once you do that, then you can move into the next step, which is reducing insulin, and that is going to lead to you losing fat cells or losing fat. And then the last step is going to be protecting your body. This is the right sequence, in my opinion. I'm sure other people have different opinions, but I have done this. I have gone through so many mistakes, and I had to figure out this sequence for it to work for me, and that's why I'm here teaching this to you. So I hope that this makes sense. I'm currently doing a challenge where I'm trying to make as many videos as possible just so I can get into a cadence of talking about this. So if I make mistakes, I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to get into talking more about insulin resistance, because this is an issue that I see a lot of people misunderstand, and they misunderstand how to deal with it, and they misunderstand the order in which you need to tackle it. And so I think if I can talk about it a lot on this channel and I can create awareness, then a lot of people will follow the right steps necessary to lose weight. All right. So if you're interested in learning more, I'll have information below on how you can work with me. And I look forward to seeing you on the next video. I have a previous video that I did where I basically talk about my story of how I came up with the SHARP method. And I go through into a little bit more details about what the method is, which is like, stabilizing your blood sugar and your hunger, healing the gut, then having access and release of fat cells, and then lastly protecting yourself. So once you follow the SHARP method, you are going to have better success with weight loss, especially with insulin resistance, because insulin resistance causes damage that we have to fix, and if you don't fix that damage, it's just going to cause more problems down the line. So I hope the video was helpful. If you have questions, leave them below. I'll see you on the next video. Bye.